Welcome to Shadows at Dusk. Dusk is not the end. It's the doorway between two worlds. A place where stories slip through, quiet, cold, and true. You've entered that space now, and what follows is meant for you. Stay in the shadow. The sky wept its first cold tear onto Elias's cheek, just as the final tent zipper grated shut. He tilted his face towards the bruised heavens, a familiar stubbornness tightening his jaw against the unease coiling in his gut. This tranquil woodland escape, promised so fervently to Clara and the children, was already fraying at the edges. He couldn't know then that the bruised sky held far less menace than the shadowed earth beneath it. Papa is the sky crying. Leo, his son, peered up, small face a canvas of mingled thrill and trepidation. Elias manufactured a smile. Just clearing its throat, little hawk. Nothing we can't handle. Clara, guiding their daughter Maya into the larger tent's canvas embrace, cast him a look freighted with skepticism. Perhaps we should reconsider, Elias. This feels heavier than a throat clearing. He shook his head, conviction warring with a rising disquiet. We'll be snug. I scanned the predictions before we left. Just a fleeting shower. How bitterly he would regret that certainty. The rain commenced its true assault. What began as a tentative tapping escalated into a frantic drumming against the nylon walls, a liquid curtain descending upon the forest. Thunder began its deep-throated monologue in the distance, punctuated by stark electric flashes that briefly, brutally illuminated their arboreal cage. The children's fear was palpable, so they conjured defiance with stories, their hands dancing as shadow beasts against the tent walls in the flashlight's beam. Eventually, as the hours bled away, the storm's fury abated. The relentless percussion softened to a whispering drizzle. The thunder retreated, muttering like a disgruntled giant. Drained by the day's long trek and the storm's drama, sleep claimed them all. He awoke abruptly, ripped from sleep by an absence, silence. The storm had exhaled its last breath, leaving behind a profound stillness that felt heavier than the earlier thunder. 3:00 a.m. blinked accusingly from his watch. Something prickled at the edge of his senses, a wrongness in the quiet. Unzipping the tent flap with excruciating care, careful not to disturb Clara, he slipped into the chill, mist-shrouded air. The world outside was spectral, bathed in an ethereal gray light. Then his gaze snagged, and the blood in his veins turned to ice. Chaos reigned where their small camp had stood, their bastion of order. The picnic table, laden with cooler and provisions, lay violently overturned. Gear vomited from backpacks littered the sodden earth, trampled into the muck. Storm damage? A desperate hope flickered and died. No tempest wrought this deliberate violation. Heavy, unfamiliar boot prints marred the mud, trampling their transient claim. And there, gouged deep into the ancient bark of a nearby oak, a raw declaration sent tremors down his spine. Leave. This isn't yours. His heart hammered against his ribs. He scrambled back into the tent. Clara, he hissed, shaking her shoulder with urgent force. "Clara, wake. We have to leave." She surfaced from sleep, blinking against the sudden intrusion. "What? Elias, what is it?" In strained whispers, careful not to wake the children nestled nearby, he relayed the scene outside. Clara's face bleached in the dimness, her eyes widening with dawning horror. "The ranger station. Call someone," she urged, fingers scrabbling for her phone. He nodded grimly as her expression collapsed. "Nothing," she breathed. "No service." Predictable, yet devastating. Miles deep, swallowed by wilderness, utterly alone. "Wake the children," Elias said, striving for a calm he didn't possess. "We gather what we can carry, hike back to the car. It's only a few miles." Clara nodded, the fear stark in her eyes. As they gently roused Leo and Maya, offering vague reassurances that felt thin even to him, the unnerving sensation of being watched intensified, prickling the back of his neck. They packed with frantic, hushed efficiency, their movements jerky, gazes constantly sweeping the oppressive tree line for any flicker of movement. The children, absorbing the ambient dread, were unnaturally subdued. They were poised for flight when Maya clutched his sleeve. "Papa," she whispered, her small finger trembling as it pointed towards the dense woods. "Someone was there. I saw." He followed her gesture, pulse thundering. Blank darkness met his stare. Then, a subtle shift, a deeper shadow detaching itself from the gloom. Another materialized beside it, then a third. "Clara," he commanded, his voice low, tight with adrenaline. "Children in the tent, now." She obeyed without question, herding Leo and Maya back under the canvas shield. Elias stood his ground, a solitary figure projecting a bravery he acutely lacked. "Who's there?" His voice, thin and uncertain, snagged on the heavy silence. "We're leaving. Understand? Just let us go." Silence stretched, thick and menacing. Then, a voice like grinding stones scraped from the shadows. "Our ground. You don't belong." Elias swallowed, throat dry. His mind raced. "We apologize. A mistake. We're packing. We'll be gone. Give us an hour." A coarse, humorless laugh echoed, bouncing between the ancient trees. 10 minutes? Then we come." Ice water flooded his veins. He spun back to the tent, hands trembling as he tore at the zipper. Clara looked up, her face a mask of terror in the lantern's weak glow. "Now," he whispered, the word barely audible. "Go. Leave it all. Just what fits in the packs." Clara nodded, her fear a tangible thing in the cramped space. They moved with desperate speed, stuffing essentials, water, first aid, the remaining snacks, into their small day packs. The children, bless their terrified hearts, seemed to grasp the lethal urgency, offering no protest, asking no questions. As they emerged, the forest seemed to lean in, alive with rustling whispers and the sharp snap of distant twigs. Closer. They were getting closer. "Stay tight," Elias murmured, taking Maya's hand while Clara seized Leo's. "Towards the car. Whatever you hear, don't look back. Don't stop." They plunged into the arboreal labyrinth, the flashlight beam a frantic, inadequate eye slicing through the gloom. Rain-soaked earth became a treacherous mire, grasping roots invisible tripwires. Behind them, the forest erupted. No longer stealthy, their pursuers crashed through the undergrowth, voices raised in guttural shouts, a primal symphony of pursuit that clawed at their heels. Minutes stretched into elastic eternities. Then, a sharp cry shattered the rhythm. Leo pitched forward, his ankle twisting beneath him with an audible crack. "My leg," he sobbed, Clara already kneeling beside him. "I can't. It hurts." Closer now, the calls bayed like hounds. No time. Wordlessly, Elias passed Maya to Clara, hefted Leo onto his back, the boy's small weight a sudden desperate anchor. "Hold fast, son," he strained, ignoring the fire in his own lungs. Almost there. Onward they surged, Elias's legs screaming, the shouts behind them cresting into a frenzied roar. They were closing. Just as his muscles threatened total rebellion, salvation, a metallic glint piercing the dense weave of trees. The car. There, Elias choked out. The clearing. They burst from the suffocating woods into the small, muddy space where their vehicle waited. His fingers, slicked with sweat and fear, betrayed him, fumbling against the cold metal of the keys. "Elias, hurry," Clara cried, her gaze locked on the tree line behind them. He saw them too now, indistinct figures spilling from the shadows. A click, unnaturally loud in the charged air, signaled the car unlocking. They tumbled inside, Elias jamming the key into the ignition. The engine coughed, then roared, a defiant sound against the encroaching menace. A face, contorted with fury, slammed against the driver's side window as the first pursuer reached them. He threw the gear shift into reverse. Tires spun, spitting mud, then bit into the earth. They shot backward, narrowly avoiding a collision with a sentinel pine, before Elias wrenched the wheel, aiming the hood towards the narrow track leading out. In the rearview mirror, figures coalesced in the clearing, a knot of men, faces obscured by distance and darkness, watching their frantic retreat. They drove without speaking, without stopping, until the first lights of civilization pierced the pre-dawn gloom. The car slid into the parking lot of the town police station, engine ticking, their ragged breaths loud in the sudden quiet. Clara turned to him, her face luminous and pale in the nascent light. Elias. Who were they? What was that? He shook his head, the night's events still a chaotic reel in his mind. "I don't know, but we're out, we're safe, that's the thing." Waiting for the station doors to open, a profound sense of having skirted annihilation settled over him. The woods, once his sanctuary, now felt imbued with a latent hostility. He looked at his family. Clara, arm protectively encircling Maya. Leo, bravely testing his swollen ankle with a wince. Guilt washed over him, cold and sharp. His arrogance, his dismissal of Clara's intuition had led them to the precipice. "I'm sorry," he managed, his voice thick. "Clara, you were right. I should have listened. This is my fault." Her hand found his, her grip firm, grounding. "We're all right, Elias. We got out together. That's what matters." As the sun finally breached the horizon, painting the small town in hopeful hues, Elias made a silent, fervent promise. Never again. No more reckless disregard for the whispers of caution, especially where his family was concerned. The wilderness, majestic and alluring, harbored teeth he hadn't respected. They had sought simple communion with nature and found themselves fleeing for their lives through its darkened heart. Yet they had endured, together, and sitting there, poised to recount their terror, he knew that bond, tested and unbroken, was the only thing truly indispensable. The gear was lost, the car splattered with mud and fear, but his family huddled close, breathing safe, but they were everything. The memory of that night would remain, a stark engraving, a testament to the shadows that can gather in beautiful places, and the fierce, defiant light found in facing them as one. The whisper of decay underfoot, dry leaves crumbling, was the only sound punctuating the forest's profound stillness. I halted, my exhalations ghosting into the sharp autumn air. A wrongness permeated the woods, a held breath, a tension coiling in the silence. Then a flicker, too quick, too deliberate for deer, darting between the umber trunks. My solitude was fractured. This pilgrimage into tranquility was warping into something primal, a struggle etched against the dying light. Elias, that's the name I answer to. The wild places have always been my refuge. Raised near the sprawling ancient heart of the northern ranges, my youth was spent tracing forgotten trails, learning the language of stone and stream. Now, nearly 3 decades weathered, the city's clamor still drives me back to this embrace, seeking the clarity only found miles deep in untamed land. This weekend was meant for that very communion, just Elias, the weight of his pack, and the vast, indifferent wilderness. Hours I'd walked, immersed in the fiery spectacle of fall, the solitude a welcome balm. Yet, as afternoon bled towards evening, peace frayed at the edges, replaced by a prickling disquiet. It began subtly, the sharp crack of a twig that echoed too loudly, a furtive rustling in the undergrowth just beyond sight. Sounds ordinarily dismissed as forest chatter now snagged my attention, tightening a knot low in my gut. Instinct, older than reason, whispered a warning I tried desperately to ignore, labeling it mere animal movements. Rounding a curve, sculpted by time and erosion, the sight that greeted me froze the marrow in my bones. A small clearing lay violated, scarred by a crude encampment. Tarpaulins, stained and ripped, sagged between trees, forming a squalid labyrinth. The ground was a midden of empty tins and discarded bottles glinting dully. And there, gouged into the rough hide of a venerable oak, 2 words screamed silently in jagged, furious script: "Keep out." My pulse hammered against my ribs. Escape was the only imperative. I pivoted, intending to dissolve back into the trees I'd just emerged from, but harsh male voices snagged the air, drawing closer with unnerving speed. Raw panic surged, a cold wave. I threw myself behind a granite boulder, folding into the earth, striving for invisibility. Through a narrow fissure in the rock, I watched 3 figures stumble into the clearing. They were rough-hewn men, faces obscured by matted beards, clad in layers of tattered cloth. Each bore a long gun, carried with casual menace. "Told you I heard something," one rasped, his gaze sweeping the perimeter like a predator's. "Probably just another city hiker. Think these woods belong to them." "Well," a third man offered, punctuated by a low, mirthless chuckle that slivered down my spine. "If you did hear him, he picked a damn poor day for a walkabout." I ceased breathing, convinced even the flutter of my own heart was too loud. They prowled the clearing, their search pattern tightening, inexorably drawing nearer my refuge. Staying hidden was a dwindling option. Discovery felt inevitable. In a heartbeat, calculating the angle of their turned backs, I exploded from behind the boulder. I ran, not jogged, not sprinted, but fled with the desperation of prey, branches lashing my face as I plunged headlong through the dense underbrush. Behind me, startled shouts erupted, followed by the chillingly distinct snick-clack of rifle mechanisms engaging. "There, get him!" Terror lent an impossible swiftness to my limbs. I vaulted over moss-slicked logs, ducked beneath low-slung boughs. The familiar forest transformed into a treacherous gauntlet. A gunshot ripped through the quiet. The supersonic crack followed instantly by the thwack of lead, biting into wood scant inches from my skull. Splintered bark peppered my cheek like angry hornets. I didn't falter, didn't dare a backward glance. I only ran. Their crashing pursuit echoed behind me, unnervingly close. They moved with a familiarity I lacked. Capture felt like a closing fist. I needed sanctuary, a strategy. Ahead, the earth fell away into a steep, shadowed ravine. Without a second thought, I launched myself down the incline, sliding, tumbling amidst a cascade of loose scree and soil. At the bottom, a shallow overhang, a mere indentation carved by water and time, offered the slimmest hope. I wedged myself into the cramped darkness, pressing back against the cold, damp rock until I could shrink no further. Moments later, heavy footfalls pounded the ravine's lip. Where'd he vanish? One voice snarled, thick with frustration. Down here somewhere. Couldn't have outrun us that fast, another countered. My breath hitched as I heard them scrambling down the slope, dislodging pebbles and dirt that pattered near my hiding spot, some spilling into the opening. Don't look closely, don't look here. For an agonizing stretch, minutes that felt like glacial epics, they scoured the ravine floor. I heard them mere feet away, the sound of boots kicking through brush, muttered curses as they peered into shadows. My entire being was coiled, a spring wound tight, braced for the inevitable discovery. Then deliverance, improbable and sweet. Nah, he ain't here. Musta kept going, downstream maybe. Come on. Their receding footsteps faded into the forest's tapestry of sound, but I remained entombed. Only when the light filtering through the canopy began to truly dim, and my protesting muscles screamed for release, did I dare to uncurl myself. Emerging onto unsteady legs, I climbed laboriously from the ravine. Every nocturnal forest sound, a snapping twig, the rustle of unseen creatures, sent jolts of adrenaline through me. The men could still be near, watching, but the woods held only their usual evening chorus. Retracing my steps towards the trailhead in the encroaching darkness, with those men potentially patrolling, felt suicidal. Forward, deeper into the unknown, was the only path. Night descended, transforming the familiar woods into an alien landscape of shifting shadows and phantasmal shapes. Gnarled stumps became crouching figures. Twisted rocks loomed like predators. The sudden piercing hoot of an owl nearly stopped my heart. Yet I pushed onward, guided only by the cold indifference of the stars. I walked through the night. When the first pearlescent hints of dawn finally seeped through the dense foliage, I was a wreck of exhaustion, thirst, and gnawing hunger, utterly disoriented. But breathing, far from the menacing camp, far from the hunters. As the sun climbed, painting the sky in hues of hope, I finally collapsed against the broad trunk of a beech, taking trembling stock. Water bottle nearly dry, no food, location unknown. Survival, however, was paramount. Just as I began to contemplate the daunting task ahead, a sound, unlike any the forest produced, reached my ears. The distant, rhythmic whump, whump, whump of helicopter rotors. Rescue. My failure to return must have triggered an alarm. Stumbling towards the nearest sunlit patch, a small meadow, I waved my arms with frantic energy as the machine materialized overhead. Seeing it bank, beginning its descent towards me, unleashed a tidal wave of relief, so potent it buckled my knees. The aftermath unfolded in a haze of exhaustion and adrenaline withdrawal, debriefing with park rangers, the local constabulary. I recounted the squalid camp, the armed men, the terrifying chase. They listened, faces grim, confirming suspicions about transient squatters who had been menacing visitors for months. "You were lucky," a weathered ranger stated flatly. "Others who've crossed paths with that crew, they didn't walk out." Driven back towards the familiar site of my car, the events replayed, sharp and discordant. 24 hours had twisted a serene escape into a desperate fight for existence. I had stared into the abyss of raw danger and somehow emerged. The forest, my lifelong sanctuary, now possessed a dual nature, solace interwoven with stark, unpredictable peril. Yet strangely, my reverence for the wild wasn't diminished. It was deepened, tempered with a profound respect for its untamed heart, its capacity for both beauty and brutality. Pulling away from the trailhead, heading towards the life I'd nearly lost, I knew this wasn't goodbye. Perhaps not to this specific haunted trail, but to the woods, never. The terror had stripped me bare, revealing sinews of strength, resourcefulness, and courage I hadn't known existed. The next time I laced my boots, I would carry the weight of this knowledge, tread with greater caution, heightened awareness. But I would also move with a keener sense of being alive, attuned to the fierce pulse of the wild. Sometimes, illumination is found only in the deepest shadows. As for the men who hunted me, the authorities promised investigation, but a part of me understood that the wilderness guards its secrets fiercely, and some darkness remains undisturbed. My gratitude for survival was immense. The lessons learned etched deep, companions on every future journey. The whisper of the shutter, the first time, was almost lost beneath the sigh of waves against the shore. By the time it echoed for the 100th instance, a cold certainty had coiled in my gut. I was hunted. What began as a sun-drenched pause from life, a simple communion with sand and sea, had warped into a frantic ballet of avoidance, choreographed by a stranger who anticipated my every plie, my every retreat. I'd never conceived that a coastal interlude, prescribed for peace, could devolve into such a fevered dream, leaving me adrift in a sea of eroding sanity and vanished safety. My name is Ilara. Months I'd yearned for this literal escape, a balm against the relentless pulse of the city where I practiced corporate litigation, a world built of paper fortresses and adversarial attrition. Friends, witnessing my fraying edges, had championed this week-long sequestration in a drowsy seaside hamlet. The initial days unfolded like a slow exhalation. Mornings surrendered to slumber, afternoons lost in novels beneath the vast canvas of the sky, evenings tinted by sunset and Sauvignon Blanc. It was the 4th day when the discordant note first sounded. I lay supine on my towel, absorbing the sun's gilded warmth, when the precise mechanical snick of a camera lens contracting sliced through the oceanic rhythm. Eyes fluttering open, I scanned the expanse of sand. There, a man, lowering a camera whose lens looked disproportionately serious for casual holiday snaps. He was nondescript, medium build, clad in the ubiquitous uniform of the tourist, beige shorts, a muted green polo, unremarkable, until our gazes snagged. A shiver, incongruous in the midday heat, traced my spine. Something predatory lurked behind his eyes, an unnerving focus that belied the blandness of his attire. He offered a smile that was purely anatomical, a stretching of lips that failed to ignite any warmth in his stare before pivoting and merging back into the beachscape. Tourists take pictures, I reasoned, folding the unease away like a misplaced map. It means nothing. Yet the conviction felt hollow, and soon I found myself gathering my belongings, retreating to the rented cottage much earlier than planned, the sea breeze suddenly feeling less like a caress and more like a cold breath on my neck. The following day, seeking refuge in motion, I wandered the town's quaint artery of shops. A flash of familiar green in a storefront reflection, the polo shirt. My pulse leaped. I spun around, but the pavement behind me teemed with anonymous visitors. If he'd been there, he'd dissolved into the crowd. I slipped into a small cafe, needing the anchor of porcelain and steam. Nursing a latte, I marshaled arguments against my own rising panic. Paranoia, I accused myself, was weaving phantoms from thin air. This was meant to be restorative, not an exercise in hypervigilance. An hour later, stepping back into the sunlit street, I saw him, unmistakably, positioned directly across the road, Camera elevated, lens aimed squarely at me. The shutter clicked, an audible punctuation mark. He lowered the instrument, that same disquieting smile etching itself onto his face. I fled back towards the cottage, keys trembling against the lock, the illusion of coincidence evaporating entirely. He wasn't just present, he was targeting me. Why? Sleep that night was a fractured thing, punctuated by phantom noises, the creak of floorboards, the sigh of wind, each sound twisting into the shape of his presence outside my window. Morning found me hollow-eyed, nerves stretched taut. Abandoning the beach, I drove inland towards the promise of elevation and isolation offered by a nearby hiking trail. Escape, clarity, that's what I craved. The exertion helped, the rugged beauty of the coastal forest momentarily soothing the frantic hum beneath my skin. For a precious interlude, the man with the camera faded. Then, rounding a sharp bend, the path opening onto a vista point, I saw him, poised on an overlook, perhaps 100 yards distant, camera already tracking my approach. I froze, adrenaline flooding my system like an icy tide. Impossible. How could he anticipate my route? How had he outpaced me? He lowered the camera, the lens glinting, and began walking towards me, his pace unhurried. Instinct took over. I turned and ran, the carefully constructed calm shattering. Down the trail as I plunged, heedless of branches that clawed at my face, my lungs burning. Behind me, his footfalls, steady, measured, terrifyingly confident. He wasn't rushing. He knew. Bursting from the tree line into the graveled emptiness of the parking lot, I fumbled, fingers clumsy with panic, for my car keys. As the engine roared to life and I fishtailed out onto the access road, I glimpsed him in the rearview mirror, emerging from the woods, camera in hand, that cold, vacant smile still fixed upon his face. My hands still shook as I recounted the escalating nightmare to the impassive officer at the local police station. He listened with professional patience, but skepticism clouded his eyes. "Mom," he began, his tone gentle but firm, "taking photographs in public isn't against the law. Has he threatened you? Made any attempt to harm you?" Defeated, feeling utterly isolated, I left the station. The narrative sounded flimsy even to my own ears, a jumpy tourist unnerved by a shutterbug. But a deeper instinct screamed that this transcended mere awkwardness. This man, this Silas, radiated intent, a chilling purpose I couldn't name, but felt viscerally. Back within the flimsy security of the cottage, I bolted doors, drew curtains, shrinking the world down to the confines of the small house. I called Maya, my closest friend, the sound of her voice a lifeline back to normalcy. As I relayed the events, the beach, the town, the trail, her concern deepened, hardening into alarm. "Ilara, leave," she insisted, her voice sharp with urgency. "This isn't right. Come home, now." Agreement flooded me with relief. Escape. I booked the first flight out the next morning and began throwing clothes into my suitcase. Night descended, pressing in on the cottage, deepening the shadows until they felt alive. Every settling groan of the old structure was a potential footfall. Television offered no distraction. The flickering screen couldn't hold my attention. Then, near midnight, I heard it, faint but unmistakable, right outside my bedroom window. Click. My blood turned to ice water. heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat he surely must hear. I crept towards the window. Edging the curtain back a mere sliver, I saw him, standing just beyond the perimeter lights, nestled in the darkness beneath the coastal pines. As I watched, paralyzed, he raised the camera. Another picture. The brief, harsh illumination of the flash caught his face, and that smile, cold and devoid of humanity. I recoiled, snatching my phone, fumbling to dial 911, but another sound arrested my fingers, gut-wrenching in its intimacy, the slow, deliberate rotation of a key in the front door lock. A key? How? Had he been inside before? My mind fractured, scattering horrifying possibilities as the latch yielded, the soft thud of the door closing. Footsteps, slow, measured, advancing down the hallway. Closer. My eyes darted around the room, seeking a weapon, anything. A heavy ceramic table lamp. I ripped the cord from the wall, hefting its weight, positioning myself flat against the wall beside the bedroom door. The footsteps paused directly outside. Silence, thick with held breath. The doorknob began to turn. As the door swung inward, I swung the lamp with the entirety of my fear-fueled strength. A sickening thud, a sharp cry of pain. I didn't linger. I scrambled past the figure crumpling in the doorway, lunging for the front entrance. Behind me, sounds of recovery, footsteps resuming their pursuit. Out into the cool night air I burst, the soft sand of the beach path dragging at my feet. I ran towards the distant glow of the town's boardwalk lights, praying for witnesses, for help. Reaching the wooden planks, I risked a glance over my shoulder. He was there, 50 feet back perhaps, camera bouncing against his chest as he gained ground. And in that moment, bathed in the sickly yellow sodium glow, I saw his face clearly, truly saw it. Recognition struck like a physical blow. He wasn't a stranger. Silas, a man I'd helped convict 5 years prior, back when I was a junior prosecutor. A man whose parting glare from the courtroom dock had burned with raw, unadulterated hatred, promising retribution. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. He'd found me, tracked me, engineered this terror. I pushed harder, lungs screaming, legs leaden. Shouts erupted nearby, people on the boardwalk, seeing the chase. Then a sound sweeter than any symphony, the rising keen of a police siren. Silas must have heard it too. A muffled curse carried on the night air. His pace faltered. When I dared look back again, he'd vanished, swallowed by the deep shadows between the beachfront facades. The patrol car skidded to a halt beside me. An officer emerged, hand hovering near his weapon. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The adrenaline drained, leaving me trembling, collapsing onto the boardwalk planks. Between ragged gasps, the whole story poured out. The photos, the stalking, the break-in, and finally, his identity. They found Silas an hour later, attempting to board a late-night bus out of town. His camera held a chilling gallery, hundreds of images of me, oblivious on the sand, browsing in shops, vulnerable even through the cottage windows. They also recovered meticulous notes detailing my movements, my habits, and most disturbingly, a small collection of personal effects, a scarf, a discarded boarding pass. Items that could only have originated from my apartment, hundreds of miles away. He'd been paroled 6 months ago, I learned later. 6 months spent meticulously plotting, observing my life from the periphery, awaiting his moment. My vacation had inadvertently provided the perfect stage. I pressed charges, stalking, breaking, and entering. Yet as they led Silas away, cuffed and subdued, the chilling intensity in the look he shot me spoke volumes. This wasn't an ending. It was merely an intermission. I flew home the next day, back to the supposed safety of the city, but the feeling of being watched clung to me like humidity. Every camera click on a busy street, every unexpected flash of light sent jolts of fear through me. My apartment became a fortress of high-tech security. Therapy sessions chipped away at the anxiety, the paranoia. Months have bled into one another. Logic dictates my safety. Silas is imprisoned again, facing a significantly longer sentence. But sometimes, walking through the anonymous press of the city, or lying awake in the pre-dawn quiet, I hear it, or imagine I hear it, the soft, predatory click of a camera shutter. And I wonder, with a certainty that chills me deeper than any winter wind, if the feeling of being truly safe is a luxury I'll ever reclaim. It began on a Tuesday, deep in October's grasp. I recall the specific day because the warehouse had rung 14 hours from me, leaving my spine a twisted knot of agony from wrestling corrugated behemoths. Through the kitchen window, as I shambled past, the backyard security lamp flared abruptly to life. That's when it registered, a silhouette, stark and unmoving, poised precisely where the ragged edge of my lawn surrendered to the woods. My hand froze, the chipped ceramic mug hovering inches from my lips, tall, perhaps 6 feet, utterly inert between the skeletal arms of 2 ancient oaks. Features? None discernible. It resembled nothing so much as a human-shaped tear in the fabric of the evening. Setting the mug down with exaggerated care, I drifted closer to the window pane. A subtle shift, the figure receded a step, dissolving partially into the pooled ink beneath the trees. My heart commenced a frantic drumming against my ribs. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, eyes straining against the gloom. Long, distorted shadows sprawled across the damp grass under the security light's glare, yet the presence remained undeniable, half eclipsed now. My fingers, clumsy with sudden dread, fumbled for my phone and the hefty mag light, the kind weighty enough to serve as a bludgeon. A tremor ran through my hands as I wrestled with the back door lock. The autumn air, sharp and smelling of leaf mold and sodden earth, struck my face. My work boots thudded heavily on the wooden deck boards. "Hey," my voice, thin and reedy in the vast quiet. "This is private property." Another step back from the figure. It was almost lost now, a mere density in the shadows, a concentration of night. I thumbed the flashlight, carving a brilliant white arc across the tree line. Nothing but trunks, drifts of fallen leaves, the vacant spaces between. My breath plumed visibly in the chill. Down the steps I went, the flashlight beam jittering with each footfall. Above, the security lamp hummed its monotonous tune, casting a harsh circle of illumination. Beyond its perimeter, the darkness felt absolute, intensified. I halted midway across the lawn. Every primal instinct shrieked retreat. Then movement again, a fractional slide to the left, always hugging the deepest shadows. My throat constricted. Another hesitant step forward from me, met by a deeper withdrawal into the woods from it. The motion was unnerving, smooth, edgeless, almost fluid. No crunch of leaves, no snap of twig, just a silent, flowing displacement. I backed away slowly, step by cautious step, until my heels met the deck stairs. I turned, scrambled inside, slammed the bolt home, checked it twice. Every blind rattled shut. The remainder of the night bled away with me slumped in the recliner, facing the darkened windows, flashlight clutched in my lap like a talisman. Sleep was a foreign country. Dawn revealed nothing. The grass glistened with dew, but the earth beneath the tree line offered no impressions, no broken stems, no disturbed detritus to validate the night's apparition. I nearly succumbed to the comforting explanation: exhaustion, an over-caffeinated mind, sleep deprivation's phantoms. Until Wednesday night arrived, the same ritual, the draining shift, the protesting spine, the coffee mug warming my hands. I consciously averted my gaze from the kitchen window while the microwave hummed over a frozen meal, but the hook of morbid curiosity snagged me. I looked. It stood there, same location, same profound stillness. My plastic tray of Salisbury steak clattered onto the linoleum. The figure offered no reaction, merely persisted, a dark stencil against the timber. This time, I remained indoors, a prisoner watching the sentinel from behind glass for hours. It watched me back. No eyes were visible, yet I felt their weight. Thursday bled into Friday, then Saturday, each night marked by its unwavering appearance at the yard's fringe, each night punctuated by its silent retreat from any approach. My phone yielded only blurred, light-starved images. The security camera I installed captured only ambiguous, shifting shadows that danced mockingly on the playback screen. My neighbor, Silas, listened with the patient air of someone humoring the unraveling. "Probably just a deer, Elias," he offered, gesturing vaguely. "They get spooked by the light, freeze up." But I knew deer, their hesitant gait, the inevitable rustle and snap. This entity moved like drifting smoke and was utterly soundless. Sunday saw me dialing the police. Officer Shaw arrived, conducted a methodical perimeter walk, scribbled notes in a small pad. Her professionalism was a thin veneer over the familiar skepticism I'd seen in Silas's eyes, the quiet assessment of a man fraying at the edges. She suggested trimming the trees, admitting more light, speculated about bored local youths engaged in elaborate pranks. But teenagers tire, teenagers giggle, or bolt, or leave muddy tracks. This presence felt different, patient, methodical, imbued with some obscure purpose I couldn't begin to fathom. The sleep deficit gnawed at my focus. On Tuesday at the warehouse, a dropped crate, inventory scattering, my foot narrowly escaping crushing injury. My supervisor, concern warring with exasperation, sent me home. I sat in the driveway's sanctuary for 20 minutes, the car engine ticking cool, gaze fixed on the woods, summoning the fortitude to cross my own threshold. That night, resolution hardened within me. I would outlast it. Bundled in my thickest coat, I planted a chair on the deck, flanked by twin thermoses of black coffee, the heavy flashlight resting across my thighs, phone battery at full charge. Sunrise would find me here, if necessary. The security light blinked on at 8:43 p.m. I noted the time on my phone, a grim formality, and there it stood, punctual as a tide, nestled between its customary oaks. 2 weeks now, and never a deviation from that precise spot. "What do you want?" My voice, surprisingly steady this time, fear transmuted into a brittle alloy of frustration and anger. "Why are you here?" Silence answered. Stillness answered. Only that unnerving, patient regard. 11:17 p.m. A sound, the first ever elicited. A faint, dry scraping, like desiccated leaves dragged across rough stone. The figure trembled slightly, and the realization dawned. The sound originated from it. My knuckles whitened on the flashlight's grip. The scraping intensified, grew louder. A step forward. The figure detached itself from the tree line, the first deliberate advance towards me. My heart hammered violently, every muscle coiled, poised for flight. Another step. It now stood fully exposed on the lawn, yet the security light seemed to bend around it, failing to illuminate, merely outlining a shape composed of shadow itself. It was like observing a fissure in the world, a fragment of pure night that had somehow gained volition. The scraping noise swelled, filling my ears, vibrating in my teeth. Another step, and another. It had crossed half the yard. I lifted the flashlight, thumb poised on the switch, but some ancient animal part of my brain screamed against clarity. Seeing this thing fully was a knowledge I instinctively recoiled from. I lurched to my feet, the chair tumbling backward with a clatter. My legs were trembling uncontrollably. The figure halted. The scraping ceased abruptly, leaving a deafening, ringing void. We stood locked in a strange tableau, perhaps 20 feet separating us. Then an arm began to lift. The motion was fundamentally wrong, too fluid, possessing impossible angles, like time-lapsed botanical growth, played in jarring reverse. The limb continued to extend, stretching, impossibly long, reaching for me across the intervening space. I fled, burst through the door, fumbled the deadbolt, pounded up the stairs to the bedroom, collapsing against the cool plaster, breath tearing through my lungs. I risked no further glance out the window that night. Morning found me calling in sick, then launching into a frenzy of activity, installing blinding floodlights, hacking back undergrowth, lopping low-hanging branches, a desperate campaign against shadows. More cameras, motion sensors, even a costly electric fence system, futile gestures. It reappeared that night, precisely where it always stood, brazenly ignoring the newly cleared space and the intense illumination. The cameras recorded only snowstorms of static. The sensors remained stubbornly inert. The fence hummed uselessly. But a shift had occurred. Now it would periodically step forward, always pausing halfway across the lawn, always raising that grotesque, elongated arm, always melting back into the trees if I retreated indoors or averted my gaze. My life inverted, sleeping fitfully during daylight hours, existing as a nocturnal vigilante in my own home. Blackout curtains sealed my bedroom windows. Caffeine pills became sustenance. Spreadsheets materialized, tracking appearances, movements, the nuances of the scraping sound. Understanding became an obsession, a pattern, a logic, any sliver of reason to cling to. Week 3 claimed my job. Too many absences, too many near disasters on the warehouse floor. Silas's check-ins dwindled, then ceased. Officer Shaw's voicemail became a dead end. I couldn't fault them. The narrative I spun sounded like the ravings of encroaching madness. The figure, meanwhile, grew bolder. Its tentative advances stretched further across the lawn. The scraping sound acquired texture, layers. Sometimes, within its dry rasp, I hallucinated fragmented syllables of no known tongue. I sealed myself inside completely. Groceries arrived via delivery. The blinds remained drawn, yet I felt it perpetually out there, waiting. The air inside grew heavy, stagnant. The walls seemed to subtly contract. 4 weeks adrift in this deepening nightmare, I fractured. Sleep deprivation, stark isolation, and unrelenting fear had eroded me to a raw nerve. 3:00 a.m. found me huddled on the cold kitchen tiles, the endless scraping a corrosive soundtrack to my dissolution. A decision crystallized. This purgatory had to end. Pulling on my coat, flashlight in hand, I stepped onto the deck. The figure stood in its designated place, the impossible arm already beginning its horrifying unfurlment. Drawing a ragged breath, I began to walk toward it. No retreat this time. The scraping escalated with each step, a physical pressure against my eardrums. My vision swam at the periphery. My nose began to bleed, a warm trickle down my lip. But I walked on. 10 feet. Details emerged, though my mind bucked against processing them. The darkness wasn't mere shadow. It was the figure flowing, shifting like black liquid defying gravity. 5 feet. The arms stretched, impossibly jointed, reaching. The scraping consumed all other sound. 3 feet. 2. 1. I stopped, raised the flashlight, thumb hovering. The figure lowered its arm. The scraping noise sheared off into absolute silence. And in that sudden quiet, I heard breathing, not from the figure before me, but from behind. Slowly, mechanically, I turned. Another figure stood on my deck, identical to the first. Its arm lifted. Another stepped from behind a gnarled oak to my left. Another materialized from the shadows, pooling behind a garden shed. More emerged along a tree line. 2, 5, a dozen. Each an impossible silhouette, each raising an impossibly jointed limb towards me. I stood frozen, encircled by darkness-given form. The flashlight slipped from my numb fingers, thudding softly onto the damp grass. A synchronized step forward from the circle. Another. The scraping resumed, now a multi-directional chorus. Dry leaves, stone, and something else, something indefinably hungry. I closed my eyes, felt the displacement of air as those 2 long arms reached, and waited for the inevitable. "Elias? Hey, Elias," Silas's voice, slicing through the soundscape. A car door slammed nearby, footsteps crunching on gravel. My eyes snapped open, gone. The figures had vanished, just my backyard, starkly lit, empty. Silas stood at the side gate, clutching a paper bag. "Brought some takeout," he called, his voice laced with unease. "You weren't answering your phone. Got worried, man." I scanned the perimeter again. No dark shapes, no scraping, only the chirr of crickets and the distant hum of traffic. "Come inside," I managed, my voice sounding alien, scraped raw. It's not safe out here after dark." Silas shot me a peculiar look, but followed me in. I secured the door, double-checking the lock. "You look like hell," he observed, unpacking containers of greasy noodles and sweet and sour pork. "When did you last sleep?" I offered no answer, moving instead to the kitchen window, pulling the blind firmly shut. Looking was unnecessary. I knew, with chilling certainty, they were out there, patient in the shadows, waiting for my solitude to return. Silas stayed for 2 hours. We ate. We spoke of trivialities: his job, the local sports team, his kids' latest antics. He studiously ignored my involuntary flinches at every creak and rustle from beyond the walls. When he finally left, I escorted him to his car, lingered in the driveway until his taillights winked out around the bend. Then back inside, locks secured, I began to pack. The next morning, I called my sister, Clara, in Arizona. "A spare room," she confirmed. "Plenty of sunshine there," she'd said. "Not so many trees, fewer shadows for things to take root in. Movers were hired. Most of my life stayed behind." I drove west, my car crammed with essentials, refusing to glance in the rearview mirror until Ohio was merely a memory several states past. Months have passed. My current residence is an anonymous stucco apartment complex surrounded by concrete and unforgiving desert light. My windows face east, greeting the sunrise. I found work, day shifts, another warehouse. Sometimes the lights stay on while I sleep. I compulsively check the online news from my old town, scanning for reports of disappearances, peculiar sightings near the house I abandoned. Nothing thus far. New owners settled in last month. The urge to call, to warn them, surfaces occasionally, but the words die in my throat. I know how it would sound. Perhaps it was all just my mind fracturing under pressure. Stress, exhaustion, isolation, conjuring demons from the dark. My therapist gently suggests as much. She's likely correct. Still, I avoid venturing out after nightfall, and sometimes, drifting in the pre-dawn quiet, I catch a faint, dry sound, disturbingly akin to scraping, like dead leaves skittering across stone, seeming to emanate from just beyond my window. The blinds remain closed. I have no desire to confirm if anything stands out there, reaching for me with arms too long for this world. I don't want to know if they followed. I don't want to know if they are still waiting. Precisely when the landscape began its subtle metamorphosis, I cannot say. 6 months prior, perhaps, I'd acquired it, plucked from the sun-bleached offerings of a neighborhood yard sale. A pastoral scene, ostensibly tranquil, undulating emerald turf, a clutch of trees, hazy hills receding into the distance. A simple fence bisected the foreground, flanked by nondescript blossoms near a placid pond. Its purpose was utilitarian, filling a void on the corridor wall, a blankness that had long irked me. Innocuous it seemed then. Aged, certainly, its pigments somewhat desiccated, yet contained within a decent, albeit worn, frame. The colors whispered serenity. After the initial novelty faded, perhaps a fortnight, it became mere backdrop, a silent witness to my daily passage between slumber and ablution. Then, roughly a month ago, mid-stride down the hallway one morning, I halted. An inexplicable dissonance snagged my attention. The copse of trees, huddled stage left, they felt altered. Hadn't they nestled closer to the fence line before? Now a perceptible distance separated them. Perhaps, I reasoned, my initial inspection had been cursory. I strained to recall their former arrangement, but the memory remained elusive, veiled. The canvas bore the fine cartography of age, hairline cracks crazing the painted sky. Maybe, I mused, it was merely a trick of light, the way dawn's rays caught the fractured surface, lending the arboreal cluster an unfamiliar perspective. A shrug, a dismissal, and the rhythm of the day resumed. Days later, another irregularity intruded. The heavens depicted within the frame seemed burdened, the clouds assuming a bruised pre-storm umbra. My recollection insisted on a gentler sky, pale cerulean softness. I lingered, leaning close, scrutinizing. Was this somber detail an oversight on my part? The impasto was visible. I could trace the artist's hand in the textured swirls of the clouds, rough-hewn, uneven. My index finger tapped the wooden perimeter, solid, resonant with age. The canvas itself appeared ordinary. Nothing stirred under my gaze. It must be me, I concluded, an overwrought mind projecting anxieties onto inanimate pigment. The ensuing week saw me pause with increasing frequency before that framed rectangle. Each time, a fresh anomaly presented itself, a small thorn of unease pricking my consciousness. The sward appeared clipped one day, overgrown the next. Floral hues shifted subtly. A fracture materialized in a corner of the fence. A knot would tighten low in my belly with every discovery, my breath catching, a faint constriction in my chest. I'd rake fingers through my hair, step back, blink forcefully, then look again. The scene remained stubbornly static while observed, a tableau of perfect stillness. Yet day by day, the discrepancies accumulated, a disquieting inventory. A dryness coated my throat whenever I passed. Ignoring it became a conscious effort, futile given its placement, an unavoidable fixture on the route to bath or bed. One dawn delivered a sight that slicked my palms with nervous sweat. A darkness coalesced within the tree line, an intrusion where none had existed. Amorphous, yet undeniably anthropomorphic, a figure lurking deep amongst the trunks. Small, indistinct, more silhouette than substance. I drew nearer, eyes narrowed, breath held captive. A shadow woven into the very fabric of the paint, it seemed. Featureless, devoid of discernible attire, just a patch of deeper pigment suggesting human form. A frisson traced the length of my arms. Dismiss it, I commanded myself. Perhaps it was always there, unnoticed. But a deeper certainty countered the denial. I had studied those trees, interrogated their painted leaves countless times. I would have seen it. Subsequent nights found me lingering in the unlit hallway, the painting a deeper rectangle of shadow on the wall. My hand hovered near the switch, a reluctance to confront it in the gloom taking root. Foolish, this trepidation before mere art. Yet my shoulders remained rigid, seized by an unseen tension. I flicked the switch. The corridor sprang into light. Initially, normalcy reigned, but then the silhouette. Closer now, undeniably, skirting the edge of the woods. My eyes strained. Its shape sharpened marginally. Tall, perhaps, with unnaturally long limbs. The details remained infuriatingly obscure. A sour churning began in my gut. I retreated abruptly to my bedroom, closing the door firmly, listening. Silence answered. The transmutations persisted, accelerating. Each day, the figure advanced, inching towards the foreground. The sky bled into twilight hues, trees contorted into impossible angles. The fence showed further ruin, splintered and breached. The grass lay trampled, flattened. The flowers wilted, their painted life force draining away. Rational explanations withered. Was the painting simply revealing layers of detail I'd perpetually missed? Did the hallway's light shift so drastically with the turning seasons? Were my own eyes betraying me? I clung to these flimsy possibilities, yet nocturnal whispers began to undermine them. Soft clicks, like stressed wood fibers parting. Then faint exhalations, brief and hushed, emanating from the painting's vicinity. I'd stand motionless in the passage, straining to capture the ephemeral sounds. They were there, subtle yet undeniable. My muscles corded. The fine hairs on my nape prickled. Reaching out, my fingers brushed the frame, cool to the touch. Pressing my ear close, I detected a soft, abrasive creaking, reminiscent of paint scraping against a resistant surface. My throat constricted. Flipping the lights back on, I subjected the painting to intense scrutiny. It appeared unchanged from its evening state, yet the figure, it stood almost at the fence line now, starkly defined enough that I could discern dark, hollow depressions where eyes should reside. Its head canted, as if observing something just beyond the canvas edge, as if observing me. I recoiled, heart hammering against my ribs, and fled to the living room, sinking onto the sofa, forcing measured breaths. The next day resolved my course. The painting had to go. Enough. Grasping the frame's upper edge, I attempted to lift it from its mooring. It refused to yield. I pulled with greater force. It felt fused to the wall. A glance behind confirmed the single nail it hung upon, yet now it possessed the immovability of something bonded, welded. I strained, pushed, pulled. The frame emitted a low groan. The painted surface seemed to ripple beneath the glass, but removal remained impossible. Resorting to a flathead screwdriver, I tried prying it loose. The tool's tip gouged plaster, but the frame held fast. Sweat beaded on my forehead, my jaw clamped tight. One final desperate heave, throwing my weight into it. The frame shrieked in protest, but remained stubbornly affixed. Muscles screamed. Defeated, breathing raggedly, I stepped back. It would have to wait. That night, I extinguished the hallway lights and stood sentinel in the darkness, striving for utter stillness. A delicate tapping commenced, like fingernails drumming lightly on wood from within the frame. It was followed by a soft, glutinous sound, viscous, sliding. My hand shot to the switch. Light flooded the corridor. The painting's surface glistened, unnaturally slick, like fresh varnish. I leaned in. The figure now stood directly behind the fence. The wooden slats looked shattered, violently broken. The entity itself appeared taller, leaner than before. The sky above was almost obsidian. The grass, utterly despoiled. Bringing my face mere inches away, I perceived minuscule droplets of moisture beating on the painted fence. Tentatively, I touched the glass, expecting cool hardness. My fingertip met dampness. A cloying odor, reminiscent of old pigments and binder, filled my nostrils. My stomach revolted. I snatched my hand back as if burned, heart seizing. Wiping my finger frantically on my jeans, I retreated straight to my bedroom, the lock tumbling shut behind me. Sleep offered no refuge. Twice I startled awake, convinced I heard footfalls pacing the hallway. Slipping from bed, I pressed pressed my ear to the door. A faint crackling sound reached me. I flung the door open, simultaneously hitting the light switch. Stillness. The painting hung there precisely as I'd last seen it. The figure stared blankly forward, its eyes abyssal pits of paint. I retreated, closing the door again, and perched on the edge of my bed, leaving the bedroom light burning. A frail ward against the encroaching dread, until dawn filtered through the window. Morning brought futile attempts at summoning aid. Elias claimed prior commitments. Another call went unanswered. I found myself standing before the painting again, arms crossed, locked in a silent confrontation. It had worsened. The scene plunged deeper into shadow. The trees writhed tortured shapes against the gloom. The fence was dissolving into ruin, the grass patchy and dead, and the figure, it occupied the very forefront now. I could distinguish what resembled hands, dark lumps of pigment gripping a fence post. Its head angled sharply downward, as if exerting immense pressure against an invisible barrier. I tapped the glass once more. A faint, hollow resonance answered, like striking thin, brittle plastic. Fetching a damp cloth, I tried rubbing the frame, hoping to loosen whatever held it. The wood felt abrasive, hostile. Splinters snagged the fabric. Pulling my hand away, I saw angry red scratches bloom across my palm. A sharp sting. I pressed my lips into a thin line, fighting back a rising tide of panic. A new tactic. From the garage, I retrieved a hammer. Light taps against a frame yielded nothing, only solid resistance. Harder strikes proved equally ineffective. The hammer rebounded slightly, leaving no impression. I aimed for the glass. A dull thud. No cracks. Harder. Still intact. My arm trembled with exertion and fear. Again, striking the frame's corner with concentrated force. The impact resonated dully. The painting remained unmoved. My breath came in ragged gasps, chest aching. Halting, I leaned against the opposite wall, the hammer heavy in my grip. The thought surfaced: abandon the house, flee, never return. But my life was here. Keys, wallet, a sanctuary. This was home. I stood paralyzed, clutching the hammer, mouth parched, mind racing. That evening, I illuminated the entire house. Every switch flipped on. Hallway, bathroom, kitchen. A desperate blaze against the encroaching strangeness. From the living room, positioned in a chair affording an oblique view, I watched. The figure seemed to strain forward, pressing insistently against the painting's inner surface. The paint itself appeared to bulge subtly outward. Rising, I approached with deliberate slowness, my sneakers squeaking unnervingly on the polished floorboards. A tremor started in my legs. My hand, when I extended it, shook visibly. Touching the glass, the surface yielded, soft, gelid. I recoiled instantly, heart lurching. A faint, acrid chemical odor hung in the air. Wet paint intensified. A cough escaped me. Stumbling back, I bumped against a small, occasional table. A sharp click overhead. The lights flickered, dimmed, then stabilized, albeit weakly. My gaze snapped back to the painting. The figure shoved its dark mass against the interior plane. I saw the painted fence posts buckle under the pressure. An arm pushed forward, stretching the pigmented surface outward like grotesque skin. A wet, sucking noise accompanied the movement. My throat seized, every muscle tensed. I retreated further, sweat trickling down my neck. Flight screamed in my mind. but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. I had to get out, if only for a moment. Fumbling at the front door, I wrenched it open and stepped onto the porch, pulling the door shut, the lock clicking into place. The cool night air was a balm, though the phantom scent of paint clung stubbornly to my clothes. I wiped my face on my sleeve, feeling dizzy. An hour I remained there, pacing the small space, forcing calm, trying to banish the image of that emergence. Eventually, the realization dawned. I had nowhere else to go. This was my bed, my roof. Steeling myself, I turned back. Re-entering the house, I heard it immediately, a soft, grating scrape from the hallway, like something heavy sliding along wood. Rounding the corner, I saw the painting askew, no longer flush with the wall. Its bottom edge jutted outward. Approaching cautiously, I observed a glass surface, now distorted, rippled like heat-melted plastic. The figure, it was halfway out. A dark, ill-defined shape, thrusting its head and shoulders through the ruptured canvas. The paint itself wept onto the floorboards below, thin, viscous droplets of blackish fluid, reeking potently of turpentine. I froze, breath caught. A low, ragged wheezing sound emanated from the shape. Its head shifted slightly. No face, just a dark mass with rudimentary bumps, suggesting features. Its shoulders were broad, asymmetrical, clad in darkness, impossible to discern fabric or form. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping. My hand flew to the light switch, flicking it uselessly off and on. The bulb flickered persistently but held. The figure slid further from its prison. An arm became visible, bent at an impossible angle, digits dripping pigment onto the floor. The corridor was thick with the overwhelming stench of paint thinner. Coughing, I clamped a hand over my nose and mouth, eyes watering. Retreating until my back hit the wall, paralysis gripped me. What could I do? I clutched the hammer again, but my hand shook so violently I nearly dropped it. I took a hesitant step forward, raising the tool, but the thing continued its inexorable egress, accompanied by soft, sickening cracking sounds as it pulled itself free. Unbearable, I bolted into the living room, snatched a throw blanket from the sofa, rushed back, and flung it over the painting. It slithered off immediately, pooling on the floor. Averting my gaze from the emerging horror, I heard it, wet, squishing sounds, movement. I backed away towards my bedroom. It blocked the path to the bathroom. My only retreat was behind me. Backing into the room, eyes fixed on the hallway threshold, I pushed the door closed but left it unlocked, a desperate measure against being cornered. I stood there, panting, listening intently. Silence descended upon the hallway. Then, after minutes that stretched into an eternity, a faint rustling, the almost imperceptible creak of floorboards under weight. My heart pounded violently. My legs felt like water. The urge to bolt for the front door was overwhelming, but that path led directly past the hallway's mouth. I waited, straining my ears. The pungent odor of paint seeped under the door, pervasive, making me feel faint. Decision crystallized. I had to leave, now. Snatching keys and wallet from the nightstand, I drew a deep, shuddering breath and pulled the door open. The hallway seemed dimmer, the light fixtures sputtering erratically. The painting was empty. The frame hung askew, warped and violated. The canvas within was a dark, dripping wound on a wall. The figure was gone. A scraping sound echoed from the living room. No time for investigation. I surged forward, eyes fixed on the exit, not daring to look left or right. My sneakers skidded on something slick near the hallway entrance, breath burning in my lungs, shallow and fast. Reaching the front door, I yanked it open, stumbled outside, and slammed it shut behind me. Standing on the porch, I stared back at the closed door, the cool night air a shocking contrast to the house's contaminated atmosphere. From within, a muffled thud like furniture being displaced. What now? There was nothing else to do. Descending the steps, I crossed to my car in the driveway. The engine turned over, a reassuring rumble in the unnerving quiet. I glanced back at the house. Lamplight glowed in the windows. No movement visible. I sat there, engine idling, hands trembling on the steering wheel, the chill of drying sweat on my skin. I didn't know what that entity was, what it wanted, but remaining here was unthinkable. Shifting into reverse, I backed out of the driveway, the acrid smell of paint still clinging to me, my fingertips strangely tacky. I drove into the night with no immediate plans for return. A staccato burst of light fractured the factory's gloom. The shutters click, a lonely punctuation mark in the vast, derelict expanse of the Vulcan Forge. Lowering her Leica, Eliza scanned the cavernous space, a cathedral consecrated to rust and ruin. That's when a tremor of wrongness shivered through the stale air, a flicker at the edge of vision, a density within a shadow that had no right to be there. In that instant, the thrill of capturing urban decay curdled. Her pilgrimage for the perfect image had become a perilous hunt, and she, the quarry. Weeks this descent had simmered in her imagination. The Vulcan Forge, a skeletal silhouette clawing at the town's periphery, had whispered promises of sublime decrepitude ever since its rusted profile snagged her gaze. Shattered panes like vacant eyes, brickwork weep in mortar. It was an invitation scrawled in neglect, irresistible to an artist obsessed with entropy's beauty. Breaching the perimeter felt almost anticlimactic. A conveniently torn seam in the chain-link shroud, a brief scramble over rubble slick with moss, and she was immersed. The air hung thick, heavy with the ghosts of industry, oil, cold iron, and the pervasive Swedish tang of mold. A hallowed silence reigned, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of unseen water, a funereal cadence. This place held narratives etched in rust, and Eliza had come to translate them into light and shadow. She moved with a reverence bordering on stealth, her bootfalls swallowed by the immensity. Late afternoon sun lanced through rents in the corrugated roof, igniting dust motes into swirling galaxies, painting the desolation with strokes of ethereal gold. Here, a colossal stamping press, poised like a slumbering metal beast. There, tangled conduits resembling petrified entrails. Eliza lost herself, composing frame after frame, seeking the fragile elegance within the collapse. Time dissolved, measured only by the shifting angles of light as she ventured deeper into the forge's labyrinthine heart. Positioning her tripod before a bank of control panels, their dials eternally fixed, needles pointing to forgotten metrics, she heard it. Not a drip, not the wind, but a soft friction, a scuff, like leather whispering against concrete. A sound striving for silence. Eliza froze, her index finger suspended millimeters above the shutter release. The world contracted to the frantic timpani of her own heart against her ribs, the shallow rasp of her breath. Then again, closer. With excruciating slowness, she retracted her hand, turned. The great hall stretched before her, a landscape of looming machinery and deepening twilight. 1,000 pockets where darkness could coalesce into form. Is someone there? Her voice, thin and reedy, shattered the quiet, the echo mocking its own fragility. Hello? Only silence answered, but it was a different silence now, taut, expectant, charged with unseen voltage. A step back, involuntary, and her hip collided with the metal console. The resulting clang reverberated, a deafening alarm in the stillness, and then she saw it, a distinct shape detaching itself from the gloom between two hulking, rust-wept lathes. Not imagined, not a trick of the failing light. Another soul occupied this mausoleum, one who preferred the shadows. A cold dread coiled in her stomach, yet a sliver of defiant curiosity remained. Another urban explorer, perhaps, startled by her intrusion. But the furtive movement spoke of something else. I'm not looking for any trouble, Eliza projected, striving for a calm she didn't feel. Just taking photographs. If this is your space, I can leave. Laughter scraped through the air, sourceless yet intimate, seeming to rebound from the very walls. Leave? The voice was like rusted hinges forced open. Oh no, little shutterbug, the real exposure's just starting. Ice water flooded Eliza's veins. The tone wasn't territorial, it was predatory, laced with a chilling amusement. Escape. Now. She spun, aiming for the darkness she'd emerged from, but a second figure materialized from behind a concrete pillar, a sentinel barring her path. Tall, gaunt, face lost in the cowl of a filthy hoodie. A length of corroded pipe swung loosely in his grip. In a hurry? He murmured, the question thick with false solicitude. Eliza recoiled, her mind frantically mapping the space. Another exit? She'd navigated half the ground floor. Surely there was another way. What do you want? She stalled, edging sideways towards an arched doorway she recalled, hoping it led somewhere, anywhere else. I don't carry cash. Take the camera gear. It's worth something. The first voice chuckled again, unnervingly close now. We don't want your things, pretty bird. We want a game. No more words. Eliza bolted, plunging through the doorway into a connecting corridor. Footfalls pounded behind her, heavy, purposeful. They were giving chase. The passage stretched onward, flanked by sealed doors, their paint blistered, handles seized. Panic clawed at her throat, her lungs burning, too deep. She'd wandered too far into the ruins' embrace. Rounding a sharp bend, she spilled into a vast chamber choked with towering metal shelves, a former storeroom transformed into a steel forest. Without pausing, She plunged into the maze, praying the labyrinthine aisles would grant her concealment. She wove between the racks, suppressing the gasps tearing at her chest, the camera bag bouncing heavily against her hip. Behind her, their voices echoed, magnified by the cavernous ceiling. Come out, little bird," one called, the sing-song lilt sending shivers down her spine. "Don't be shy." She ducked behind a collapsed section of shelving, pressing herself against the cold metal, willing her ragged breathing to quiet. The camera bag felt like an anchor, but abandoning her phone nestled inside, was unthinkable. As her fingers fumbled for the device, a hand clamped onto her shoulder like a vice. A strangled cry escaped her as she was wrenched upright, finding herself face to face with a nightmare. His breath was rancid, eyes alight with a manic, feral glee. "Found you," he leered, lips peeling back to reveal a ruin of stained teeth. Pure instinct ignited. Eliza drove her knee upward, connecting solidly. A strangled wheeze erupted from him as he folded. She shoved hard, sending him staggering back into a towering shelf unit. It groaned, tilted, then surrendered to gravity with a deafening crash of metal and scattered debris. She didn't look back. Sprinting now, all pretense of stealth abandoned, fueled by raw terror and the enraged shouts erupting from the wreckage behind her. She burst from the storeroom back into a corridor. Left, a grimy staircase that's spiraling upwards. Right, more indeterminate darkness. Stairs. She took them two at a time, leg muscles screaming, adrenaline overriding the pain. Reaching the next level, she saw it, a gaping window frame, its glass long surrendered to vandals or time. Beyond lay the factory yard, the perimeter fence, the promise of open air. Freedom. Hopes surged, a desperate, intoxicating wave. She raced towards it, escape plan crystallizing. Leap, roll, run. But the threshold brought despair crashing back. A sheer drop, 15 feet at least, onto unforgiving concrete below. No soft landing, only the certainty of broken bones. Yet the thudding pursuit on the stairs behind her left no choice. Better shattered limbs than the fate promised in those predatory eyes. A ragged breath, a whispered plea to any watching saints of lost causes, and she hurled herself into the void. The impact slammed the air from her lungs. White-hot agony flared in her ankle as she crumpled onto the hard ground. No time for assessment. Angry shouts rained down from the window above. Gritting her teeth against the blinding pain, Eliza hauled herself upright, hobbling, stumbling, dragging her injured leg towards the fence. Each step was a fresh wave of nausea, her ankle threatening to buckle completely. Sounds of pursuit grew louder from ground level now. They were circling around, closing in. The fence shimmered in the distance, impossibly remote. She reached it, fingers clawing for the wire mesh, just as a hand seized the back of her jacket. She was jerked backward, momentum lost, sprawling onto her back. The fall knocked the wind out of her again, leaving her gasping like a landed fish. A face loomed above, contorted in a vicious smirk. "Thought you were clever, didn't you? He spat. "Stupid little bird. Now you really pay." As his hand reached down, a new sound pierced the twilight, the rising, insistent wail of sirens. Close, getting closer. His head snapped up, the sneer dissolving into sudden alarm. A hissed curse. He glared down at Eliza, indecision flickering across his face. Then, with a final snarl of pure frustration, he spun and melted back into the factory's gaping maw. Eliza lay there, stunned, the siren's cry washing over her like a benediction. Flashing blue and red lights strobed against the decaying brickwork. A patrol car skidded to a halt by the fence, an ambulance close behind. "Here," she rasped, voice raw and trembling. "Over here. Help me." The ensuing hours blurred, paramedics carefully splinting her ankle, uniformed officers gently taking her statement, the sterile flash of forensic cameras documenting the scene. Only later, cocooned in the antiseptic quiet of a hospital room, awaiting x-rays, did she piece together her salvation. A passing cruiser, noticing her car parked incongruously near the condemned structure, had circled back to investigate. Their arrival, guided by nothing more than routine vigilance, had been her deliverance. Her pursuers had vanished into the urban wilderness, the police assured her, but the incident was being linked to others, unsettling occurrences in the city's forgotten corners. She was lucky, they said, impossibly lucky. Lying there, the throb in her ankle, a dull counterpoint to the adrenaline's slow ebb, Eliza knew they were right. Yet even now, the allure remained. The forsaken places still whispered their secrets, tales etched in dust and decay, and she knew, with unnerving certainty, she would eventually return to listen, camera in hand, drawn back to the beautiful, perilous edges of the world. The Starlight Diner's sign sputtered fitfully, an island of weary fluorescence adrift in the vast, swallowing darkness of the highway. My rag traced lazy circles on the Formica countertop, a familiar ritual in the deep hours when the bell above the door jangled sharp and intrusive. I looked up, the practiced curve of my smile faltering. His eyes met mine across the empty space, and a dissonance in his gaze, something ancient and predatory, sent a glacial tremor tracing my vertebrae. This arrival felt different, wrong. For half a year, the graveyard shift at the Starlight had been my rhythm, the quiet hum of the coolers and the lonely whistle of the wind my companions. Not a life, precisely, but the means to one, funding the final stretch of my studies. Most nights dissolved into a predictable pattern. Bleary-eyed truckers seeking caffeine jolts, local phantoms escaping restless beds. But tonight, the air itself felt taut, humming with an unseen static. He who had entered was initially a study in blandness, unremarkable height, clothes that faded into the background, a face designed to be forgotten, except for the eyes. They were like polished river stones, cold and depthless, cataloging the worn linoleum, the chipped sugar dispensers, lingering fractionally too long on me. Evening, I managed, my voice a thinner thread than I intended. Take a seat wherever, be right with you. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips as he slid into a cracked vinyl booth towards the rear, swallowed by shadows. I retrieved a menu, the laminated edges suddenly sharp, grabbed the coffee pot, its weight a small anchor. Steeling myself, I approached. Coffee? The question was rhetorical. The dark liquid was already sloshing into the thick ceramic mug. "Thank you," he murmured, the sound smooth, almost viscous. "The Atlas burger, all the way." I scribbled the order, acutely conscious of his scrutiny, an invisible weight pressing on my shoulders. As I pivoted to retreat, his voice snagged me. "Slow one tonight, huh?" I paused, forcing a lightness I didn't feel into my return glance. Usually is this time of night. He nodded, a slow, deliberate motion, his gaze unwavering. "Must get solitary. Out here, just you." Another tremor, colder this time. I manufactured a short laugh. "Oh, you get used to the quiet. Excuse me, gotta get this cooking." I practically fled to the kitchen's swinging doors, my pulse a frantic drum against my ribs. Through the pass-through window, his silhouette remained, that unsettling half-smile fixed in place. I relayed the order to Sal, our nocturnal cook, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "Everything copacetic out there, Ilara." Sal's weathered face creased with a familiar concern. I hesitated, the lie catching in my throat, then forced a nod. "Yeah, just a quiet customer. It's fine." But fine was a continent away. Minutes crawled, each tick of the clock amplified in the charged silence. When I delivered the burger, piled high with fixings, he barely acknowledged it. Instead, the questions began, softly persistent. Where did I grow up? Any folks nearby? What time did the sun finally chase me home? Each query felt like a tiny probe, mapping my vulnerabilities. The hours bled together. He nursed the same cup of coffee, showing no inclination to leave. The diner remained our private stage, the silence punctuated only by the mournful croon from the jukebox and the periodic clink of his mug returning to the saucer. Every stolen glance confirmed it. He was watching, always watching, that cool, knowing smile etched onto his face. As the first oyster-gray streaks began to pearl the eastern horizon, a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Enough. I approached his booth, marshaling my resolve, keeping my voice level. "Sir, apologies, but we need to start the morning cleanup soon. I'll have to ask you to settle up." He stretched languidly, leaning back against the vinyl. "Now, Ilara, we both know the sign says 24 hours. Why the hurry to be rid of me?" Ice water flooded my veins. My name, a stolen thing on his tongue. I hadn't offered it. How do you know my name?" My voice cracked as I instinctively stepped back. He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound. Oh, I know quite a bit about you, Elara. Been observing for a while now. Panic flared, hot and blinding. I spun, intending to run, to scream for Sal, anything, but he moved with startling speed. His hand shot out, fingers closing around my wrist like a manacle of flesh and bone. "Sit down," he commanded, the smooth veneer gone, replaced by something hard, unyielding. "We have more to discuss." I yanked futilely against his iron grip. "Let go of me." My eyes darted around, seeking a weapon, a heavy sugar dispenser, a stray knife. I said, "Sit," he repeated, pulling me inexorably towards the booth. Just then, the bell above the door exploded with sound. We both froze, turning towards the entrance. A cluster of truckers, loud and boisterous, spilled into the diner, their cheerful noise shattering the suffocating tension like thrown stones. In that instant, his grip momentarily slackened. It was all I needed. I ripped my arm free and bolted for the sanctuary of the kitchen. "Sal!" I burst through the doors, breathless. "Call 911. Now." Sal looked up from the sizzling grill, his eyes widening at the raw terror on my face. He reached for the wall-mounted phone, his fingers fumbling for the buttons. But before he could connect, the kitchen doors slammed open again. He stood, framed in the doorway, his unremarkable face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "You shouldn't have done that, Elara," he snarled, advancing into the heat and grease-scented air. Sal, bless his grizzled heart, reacted without a second thought. He snatched a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stovetop and swung it in a wide, desperate arc. It connected with the side of the man's head with a sickening, resonant thud. He crumpled instantly, hitting the linoleum floor like a sack of stones. The aftermath was a jarring kaleidoscope, the wail of approaching sirens slicing the pre-dawn quiet, fragmented questions from uniformed officers, the clinical flash of cameras transforming the familiar diner into an alien landscape. A paramedic checked my pulse, murmuring reassurances, while a detective with tired eyes approached me. "You're incredibly fortunate," he said, his voice low and grave. "We've been hunting this individual for months. Suspected connection to assaults, disappearances, women working nights, just like you." I nodded, numb, the chilling reality of my proximity to becoming another statistic slowly seeping in. "You were smart," the detective added, his tone softening slightly. "You listened to that feeling, saved your own life." As they led the man away, cuffed and stumbling, our eyes met one final time. The calculation was gone, replaced by impotent rage. I held his gaze, refusing to flinch. I had stared down the monster under the bed, the shadow in the alley, and I was still standing. The sun was fully risen, painting the highway gold by the time they let me leave. Stepping outside, the morning air felt impossibly clean, vibrant. I drew a deep breath, the adrenaline finally beginning its slow retreat. Sal emerged behind me, his face etched with exhaustion that mirrored my own. "You holding up, kid?" he asked, genuine worry in his eyes. A small, tremulous smile touched my lips. "I will be. Thank you, Sal, for everything." He shrugged, a flush rising under his weathered skin. "Ah, figured you'd do the same. Listen, take some days. Seriously, I got the shifts covered." I opened my mouth to argue, but the night's terror surged back, breaching my carefully constructed dam. Tears welled, hot and sudden, blurring the familiar lines of the starlight. Before I knew it, I was sobbing, great, shuddering gasps. Sal awkwardly patted my shoulder, a rough, comforting presence. As the storm passed, I looked back at the diner. The place that had been my anchor, my mundane necessity, now felt haunted. Yet as the first rays of sun caught the chrome trim and the early regulars began to arrive, bewildered but determined for their coffee, a fragile defiance bloomed in my chest. This was mine. He wouldn't take this too. "Actually, Sal," I said, squaring my shoulders, the words tasting like newfound strength. "I'll be here tomorrow night. This place, it's kind of home. I'm not letting him scare me away from it." Sal's face broke into a wide grin, relief and pride mingling in his eyes. "Atta girl, but take today. Rest up. We'll keep the coffee hot for you." Walking towards my car, the night replayed, the creeping fear, the paralyzing helplessness, the unexpected surge of victory. The memories would linger, shadows in the corners of my mind, but beneath them lay something new, a certainty of my own resilience. I started the engine, glancing one last time at the diner. The neon sign still flickered, but its light no longer felt lonely or weak. It felt like a promise, a reminder that light persists, even born from darkness. And sometimes, that light is forged within, ignited precisely when everything seems lost. Driving into the sunrise, the warmth on my face felt like a benediction. I made a silent promise to myself. Instinct would no longer be a whisper to be dismissed, but a voice to be heeded. I had faced the void and walked away. Whatever came next, whatever shadows stretched across future nights, I carried this strength now, a quiet, unshakable core. The diner, the graveyard shift, they weren't just a job anymore. They were proof, and I wore that proof like armor, ready. The sun, a relentless furnace in the bleached canvas of the sky, hammered the desolate highway. Heat warped the air, conjuring liquid phantoms on the horizon. My car, a valiant old machine, riddled with rust and prone to fits, had finally surrendered its mechanical ghost, stranding me in an ocean of shimmering asphalt and silence. Thumb extended, a fragile gesture against the vast indifference, I prayed for passage, never dreaming the chariot that stopped would ferry me toward a darkness from which escape seemed unimaginable. Days I'd traveled, chasing the sunset westward, fleeing the wreckage of a love turned sour. California beckoned, a promise of renewal, But destiny, it seemed, plotted a crueler detour. An ominous percussion began deep within the engine's heart, a death rattle I couldn't ignore. It coughed, sputtered, dragged itself another agonizing mile, then exhaled a plume of smoke and died. An hour bled away under that oppressive sky. Hope dwindled with each passing car that failed to slow. The heat leached my strength, thirst tightening its grip. Resignation began to set in, the prospect of a long, sun-baked trek back to the last town looming, when a low growl vibrated through the air. A sleek, obsidian SUV materialized from the heat haze, swelling as it devoured the distance. A fragile bird of hope fluttered in my chest. It slid to a halt beside me. Behind the wheel, a man resided somewhere in the ambiguous terrain of middle age, his hair a distinguished blend of silver and night, eyes masked by dark sunglasses. The window whispered down. "Trouble?" he inquired, his smile disarmingly pleasant. Relief flooded me, potent and swift. Yes, thank heavens. My car gave out down the road. He offered a nod, a silent communion of sympathy. Climb in. Nearest town's my route. Name's Silas. Ilara, I replied, sinking into the passenger seat, embracing the arctic kiss of the air conditioning. As we surged forward, I cast a mournful glance at my derelict vehicle, already looking small and abandoned. Silas proved garrulous, inquiring about my journey, lamenting the fickleness of aging automobiles. His easy manner dissolved the hours of anxious solitude, lulling me into a false sense of security. Yet, as the miles unspooled, discordant notes began to surface. A subtle tension seized Silas's hands on the wheel, his knuckles blooming white whenever I mentioned phoning for assistance upon reaching civilization. Then came the dawning awareness. We had driven for a significant stretch, yet no signposts, no glimmers of settlement pierced the monotony. Shouldn't we be nearing the town? I ventured, striving for casualness, though my voice felt thin. Silas's smile constricted, a barely perceptible tightening at the edges. It's a touch farther than I recollected. No matter, we'll arrive soon enough. I murmured assent, but a knot of ice was forming deep in my belly. A furtive check of my phone confirmed the obvious. No bars, utterly isolated. The landscape, too, had undergone a subtle metamorphosis. The desert's stark plains had yielded to encroaching woodlands, dense and secretive. Had we crossed a border? My internal compass spun uselessly. Actually, I began, my throat suddenly parched. Perhaps we could stop at the next service station. I'm feeling a bit unwell. His grip visibly tightened. None for quite a distance. Best to push through to our destination. Our destination? Not the town. The slip, though small, resonated like a slammed door, confirming the burgeoning terror. This man harbored no intention of delivering me to safety. My thoughts scrambled, a frantic search for an escape route. Leaping out was suicide. The speed was too great, the doors likely secured. I possessed no weapon, nothing but the wits scrambling within my skull and the potential advantage of surprise. Forcing a veneer of calm, I feigned normalcy, peppering him with innocuous questions about the region. All the while my eyes scanned the cabin, desperate for leverage, for opportunity. Rounding a curve, a sliver of hope appeared, a narrow dirt track veering off into the trees. It was instinct, immediate and absolute. Oh God, stop! Stop the car! I shrieked, jabbing a finger toward the side road. I swear I saw a bear. Reflexively, Silas stomped the brakes. The SUV slewed, tires protesting against the asphalt. In that chaotic instant, I acted. My hand shot to the door handle, unlocked, and I flung myself out, tumbling onto the shoulder. The impact jarred me, but adrenaline was a potent fuel. Scrambling upright, I plunged down the dirt path, branches lashing my face as the forest swallowed me whole. Behind, a furious shout, the solid chunk of a car door slamming shut. I ran as if pursued by demons, lungs searing, legs churning with desperate power. To look back was unthinkable, the imagined horrors propelling me forward. The sounds of pursuit, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, echoed behind, a relentless metronome driving me deeper into the shadowed woods. Minutes stretched into an eternity before my legs buckled. I collapsed behind a broad trunk of an ancient tree, stifling ragged gasps, straining to hear over the frantic drumming of my own heart. Faintly, distinctly, the crunch of footsteps. He was still coming. Desperation clawed at me. Where to hide? My gaze snagged on a fallen log, its core partially devoured by rot. A grim refuge, but the only one offered. I squeezed inside, ignoring the damp funk of decay, the unsettling crawl of unseen insects against my skin. Through a crack, I watched Silas's boots pass by, crushing leaves with methodical weight. He moved with the unhurried patience of a predator assured of its quarry, which I realized with a chilling certainty was precisely what he was. Come out, wherever you are. His voice drifted through the trees, saturated with a grotesque playfulness. You can't hide forever, Ilara, and when I find you... The threat hung unfinished, more terrifying for its vagueness. I bit down hard on my lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood to choke back a whimper. Hours crawled by. Dusk began to bleed through the canopy, yet Silas persisted. I heard him circling, sometimes distant, sometimes terrifyingly close. My muscles screamed from the confinement, but movement was betrayal. As true night descended, a fresh terror took root, navigating this wilderness in darkness. Even if Silas gave up, I could wander lost until exposure claimed me. Then, impossibly, a new sound intruded. Voices. Hallucination, born of fear and exhaustion. No, undeniably human, drawing nearer. Silas, you out here? A coarse voice bellowed. My stomach plummeted. Accomplices, of course. This was likely routine, a gruesome pastime, collecting the stranded, hunting them for pleasure. "Over here," Silas yelled back. "Lost the girl, but she's got to be close." I held my breath as multiple sets of footsteps converged near my log haven. Beams from flashlights sliced through the gloom, sweeping dangerously near my refuge. "Spread out," Silas commanded. She couldn't have gotten far. Eyes squeezed shut, I offered a silent, desperate plea, and then, impossibly, an answer. A distant, rising siren, growing steadily louder. The footsteps halted. "Damn it," one of the men spat. "Police." "How in hell did they track us here?" another voice demanded, laced with panic. "Doesn't matter," Silas snapped. "Move, now." I listened to their retreating steps fade into the night's complex symphony. Still, I remained frozen, wary of a trick. The sirens crescendoed, accompanied by the crunch of tires on the unseen track. Car doors slammed. Official voices called out, identifying themselves. Even then, I waited, scarcely breathing, until a flashlight beam found my hiding place, pinning me in its glare. A calm voice followed. "Miss, are you in there? It's safe now. We're police." Slowly, stiffly, I extricated myself from the log's embrace. A female officer helped me stand, draping a blanket over my trembling shoulders. "You're safe," she murmured, guiding me toward the blessed lights of an ambulance. We received an anonymous call about suspicious activity. Lucky timing. As paramedics assessed me, the fragmented story emerged. Silas and his cohorts were predators, a blight on the region, finally cornered thanks to my flight and that unknown benefactor's call. Later, giving my statement under the sterile fluorescence of the police station, the chilling proximity of my own demise settled upon me. Almost another face on a missing person poster, another unsolved enigma. The ordeal had irrevocably marked me, leaving scars both visible and hidden deep within, but I breathed. I had endured. Stepping out into the tentative light of early morning, I knew, with a certainty forged in terror, that whatever life threw my way henceforth, I possessed the strength to meet it. If I could survive a night hunted in those woods, I could survive anything.